This is episode 78 of the Fitness in Post podcast. To access the show notes for this episode, please visit fitnessinpost.com/78. This episode is sponsored by Geek Desk. Geek Desk provides high-quality adjustable height desks. With the simple click of a button, you can change the height of your desk from sitting to standing in seconds, which can help you become more productive, ease and prevent pain, stay healthy, and live longer. I've owned a Geek Desk myself for years, and I love it. They are strong, durable, and, dare I say, even quite sexy. To learn more about the different options that Geek Desk offers, visit fitnessinpost.com/geekdesk. This episode is sponsored by Cinemody. Cinemody produces high-quality, royalty-free, and post-friendly second-unit stock and visual effects footage for filmmakers. You can find their second-unit collection at cinemody.com. That's CINEMOTI.com. And as a listener of the Fitness in Post podcast, we're offering you an exclusive 15% off discount code that's good for any order. Just enter FIP15 during checkout. Again, that's FIP15 for 15% off any order. My name is Zach Arnold. I'm a film and television editor and the creator of Fitness in Post. I've spent many years working brutally long hours in a dark room and battled numerous health problems due to the sedentary nature of my career, and that's what led me to building Fitness in Post. Whether you work in post-production like me, or if you're a designer, programmer, animator, composer, or anyone working a sedentary job all day, we'll help you learn how to sit less, focus more, eat better, and bring health and wellness back into your life. You spend all day fixing it in post, now it's time for some fitness in post. Hello and welcome to the Fitness in Post podcast, where it is my mission to help you optimize the most powerful operating system that you have, yourself. My guest today is unscripted editor and author Jeff Bartsch. Jeff has edited unscripted content for ABC, NBC, Universal, Disney, ESPN, MTV, and many others. His commentary on editing and the entertainment industry have been featured in multiple textbooks, the Associated Press, USA Today, and Time Magazine. And he's the author of Edit Better, Hollywood-Tested Strategies for Powerful Video Editing, as well as being the founder of thepoweredit.com. I first approached Jeff almost a year ago to be a guest on this show after I had read an article that he wrote entitled Big Fat Paycheck or a Trip to the ER that was about his most recent trip to the emergency room because he was working crazy long hours. But as I got to know more about Jeff, I realized that he was also a wealth of information when it comes to not only being an editor, but also advancing in your career. So in this episode, we geek out on many different topics that are both related to health in the edit bay, as well as a career in editing, and we also dive deep into the mistakes that many people make by focusing on tactics when they should be focusing on strategies. As a bonus to this episode, we have turned this into a bit of a drinking game. And of course, for the sake of this show, we're going to assume that you're drinking Shakeology or another highly nutritious shake. So every time that you hear us use the terms black hole, rabbit hole, or the bonus word of the day, online aura, take a drink, baby. But before we get to our interview, I'd like to thank all of my die-hard Fitness in Post fans out there who continue to use our Amazon link to make all of your Amazon purchases. I cannot express what a difference that this makes to keeping this podcast on the air. For those of you who are new to the show and not using our Amazon link, it couldn't be easier. Before heading to Amazon to make your next purchase, just use the link fitnessinpost.com/Amazon. That's it. It's going to take you to the exact same homepage. The only difference is that 5% of your purchase will then be donated back to the Fitness in Post program, and it doesn't cost you a cent. So once again, just bookmark the link fitnessinpost.com/Amazon as your new Amazon homepage, and 5% of every purchase you make is going to help keep this podcast alive. Thank you so much for your support. And now, without further ado, my interview with Jeff Bartsch. I'm here today with Jeff Bartsch, who is an unscripted editor as well as an author, and it is a pleasure to have you here today, Jeff.
Awesome. Good to see you.
So one of the
Virtually.
things, yes, exactly.
It's just audio.
Yeah. So among the many things that Jeff is involved with, one of them is the group, the Power Edit on Facebook, as well as Ask an Editor. Like Jeff is kind of involved a little bit in everything. So I think that you and I are kind of kindred spirits in that way. And it's funny because I was reading your bio and I said, my God, it's like reading my own bio. It was trippy how similar our upbringings were. And the reason that you're here today, before we just kind of go down the rabbit hole of kind of going into your background and my background and all that good stuff, I had originally contacted you. This was a while ago, and I guess it was like last June or last July, where you had written an article on your blog, thepoweredit.com, that was called Fat Paycheck or Trip to the ER. And at that time, I'm not sure that I really knew much about you or what you were working on, but I read this and I said, oh my God, this guy has to be on the show because this is everything that I am trying to prevent in this industry. So let's just go ahead. I want to start with that article, then we'll go backwards a little bit. We'll go into your background, and then I want to just go into some things that we've already talked about off the record, just about kind of how the industry works, the perception of editors, and how that factors into the lives that we live. And then I want to go into some of your philosophies about editing as well, because I think you've got some really cool honed in ideas that are much more macro than a lot of the stuff that we hear nowadays. But let's start with kind of the big story that brought us together in the first place.
Well, there was a time, and this was well over 10 years ago, there was a time when I was young single guy working on a show, and really like a small, tight team, a really cool show, and which will remain nameless for reasons that you'll soon realize. But the thing was, it was for a very corporate-minded network. And just the way the schedule worked was we had to turn things around such that we had to deliver a full episode every Tuesday. And what that meant was I basically ended up doing an all-nighter on Mondays. And every once in a while, I would just be cranking on the edit on a Monday, and I'd take an hour nap at like 2 a.m, and I would get up, I would walk across the street to the 7-Eleven, grab a Monster drink, chug it down, and I would just keep cranking until everyone else arrived the next morning. And it was just pulling our hair out, just trying to get the show into a place where we could screen it with the network executive in the morning. And so that's just how that show went for a while. This was not due to executives on the show. I mean, the showrunner was and is a fantastic human being, really looked out for his people as much as he could in the situation. And it just got to the point where I just started getting worn out. And there was one day I was in on a Saturday, and I was working on the cut, and I actually wasn't paying much attention. My EP walked in the room, and he's like, dude, what's happening with your leg? And I looked down at my leg, and there were red veins going up my ankle towards my knee. And I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't hurt. I'm almost done with this. I'm almost done with this section. And my EP was like, dude, you should go to the hospital. You should get that checked out. I'm like, okay, I'm almost done. It's just one. I'm in a groove. I'm moving here. And the EP goes into the other room, starts looking up, red streaks going up your leg, and he's like, you need to go to the ER now. I don't care what you're cutting, you go now. Turns out what he'd found was it was this thing that was most likely something called cellulitis, which when I first heard about cellulitis, I was like, what, is that extra fat attached to your thighs that women have to deal with? It's like, no, it's something completely different. It's a bacterial infection that usually happens when your immune system is compromised. And it can be everything from completely innocuous to outrageously painful. And if left untreated, it can literally be lethal. You know, with those red streaks, they go up your leg and they get then they get to your heart and you're dead. So, I mean, that was the scenario that I found myself in. And I didn't even realize it. You know, it literally took my showrunner saying, stop editing, go to the emergency room now. And I'm like, okay, fine. And they're like, yeah, you need antibiotics. So thankfully, clearly I'm still here. But that was really the touch point for that show. As cool as the show was, like to this day, it's one of the coolest shows I've ever cut. But I had this other moment when, thanks to the very corporate-minded network, they didn't get how production and post-production worked. So they paid like full-on overtime, like the big corporations do. My weekly paychecks on that show were crazy. They were the biggest weekly paychecks I've ever earned to this day. And still, that time, that day when I got my first batch of, my first 2 paychecks with that crazy amount of overtime in there, and I looked it up and I pulled those checks out of the envelope, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is literally the price tag I'm putting on my health. And I'm like, what am I doing? This is like, my blood ran cold. I'm like, I am putting an actual dollar on my health. This is not right. Never again.
Well, and what you actually said in your blog, because you were very close to quoting it, but your actual quote, and it was when I read this sentence that I said, I don't care how long it takes. I need to have this conversation on the podcast, because you said, this is the literal price tag I am putting on my health, and it's not enough.
No, not even close.
And when I saw that, I'm like, that is, if I could steal that and put that on my stinking website, that's it. That's the picture. That's the whole reason I have been killing myself building this program and this blog and these online courses, is that sentence right there. Is we think that there's a reason that this needs to be done, but you encapsulated it. You looked at the check and you said, well, I almost killed myself, literally almost killed myself, and this was my reward. And I don't know what it was, but with that kind of overtime, let's say it was $5,000-$6,000 for a week. Really good paycheck. I have no idea if that's it.
Actually, it was more than that.
Okay, so let's say that it was double that. Let's say that your check was $10,000. Is that worth knowing that a week from then, because of putting in those hours, that you could be dead? That's the question that you're asking.
Yeah, it's just, and it's so rare. I think it actually takes extreme circumstances for things like that to really pop out in sharp relief like that, because otherwise it's just what everyone does. It's just what's normal.
Yeah, and that to me is the problem, and I feel like I've already jumped on a giant soapbox. I can hear my soapbox voice tone already coming out. But that's
preach.
That's the problem, is that you look around and you say, well, everybody else is doing it, so I guess I need to do it. But it was the same thing for me. I don't know how old you were when you went through this, but for me, that moment was, luckily, I was really young. I was 25, and I wanted to kill myself. I was not like, oh my God, I'm crazy. Like, I was suicidally depressed, thinking I don't want to live anymore because I can't handle this lifestyle. And I was in really good shape. Like, up until that point, I took care of myself. I practiced martial arts for 10 years. I was practicing yoga. I'd done strength training. Like, visually, if somebody had looked at me, they would have said, whoa, like, this guy's in really good shape. But I was suicidally depressed, head in my hands, saying I cannot live this way one more day because of the stress and the pressure. The difference was my paycheck was $600 a week flat. Ugh. So I didn't even have the money to look at and say, this is the price tag. My price tag was complete dog. Yeah. I wasn't even making any money. For me, it was about, I'm going to get my first credit on a feature, and I'm building relationships that are going to lead me down the path of having a better career. Mm-hmm. And it was like, come on. Like, at one point, I almost said, I don't even want to do this for a living anymore. But I said, but I wanted to do this since I was like 12. Like, what else am I going to do? Everything has led to this point. So rather than getting rid of the job, it was, all right, well, how do I find a way to survive it? And that was something that you and I had talked about a little bit off the record before the show, where, everybody's always talking about, well, we need more regulations. And you had brought up Haskell Wexler, like we need 12 hours on, 12 hours off.
And that needs to be a law. It needs to be a law.
Yeah. And first of all, let me just say, I don't disagree with any of that. But the problem is thinking the regulation needs to come from an external source. The regulation has to come from within. It has to be you saying,
absolutely,
I'm not going to accept this for myself because I'm worth too much. My health is worth too much. And once you start doing that, like it's weird. There's a thread that I saw in one of the Facebook groups just today, totally unrelated to the show, but somebody was complaining about how, oh, well, here's this crazy tutorial of this young kid teaching us how to use Adobe Premiere. Like, this is why we're all making $10 an hour. And I'm like, first of all, good for this kid who's got thousands of followers on YouTube showing them how to use Premiere. Good for him. And secondly,
absolutely,
if you're getting paid $10 an hour, it's your fault because you're accepting it.
Yeah.
You're saying it's okay and you're worth $10 an hour. That's not the person paying you. It's not their fault. It's your fault for accepting it. And that's what this is all about, is not expecting the world to fix your problems. It's saying, I'm going to take responsibility for my problems and I'm going to fix them. And once I started to realize that for myself, it was all about, well, now I need to figure out what are the tools. Like, I know one thing that you talk about a lot in terms of editing, and we can go there as well, but that I look at in terms of health is tactics versus strategies. And I've gotten lost in the black hole of tactics so many times, not realizing that I needed the larger strategy first, which is something I've really started to hone in on with myself, with the program, and with this audience, is sharing the bigger picture, sharing the whys. And it sounds like that's something that you're very much honed in on as well, and really have a very clear picture of all of that as well.
Well, I mean, I will say, well, certainly within the editing context, I think it's really easy to get lost in the tactics. And that's what everyone out there is now talking about, because, I mean, let's be clear, the world is experiencing a seismic shift. No longer is editing, I mean, I know that the audience who's hearing this, this is kind of preaching to the choir. The idea of editing has always been an exclusive club. It's just no longer the case. Anyone with a cell phone that hooks up to YouTube can shoot and edit and upload video. And so now it's that great equalizer, it's the democratizer of editing, that all of a sudden people think it's like, oh, well, anyone can edit, therefore I need to learn how to do the stuff. And what they don't really realize, because they have no way of knowing it, is, yeah, I mean, you can shuffle clips in a timeline, but if you don't have an overall structure for what you're wanting to accomplish and how you expect to do that, you're going to find yourself spinning your wheels, and you're going to end up with content that just horribly misses the mark. And so that was really, I was mulling over that a lot with my book. When I was writing my book, it's called Edit Better, Hollywood-Tested Strategies for Powerful Video Editing. And it's broken up literally into two sections. The first section, I call it, looking through the telescope, looking at the big picture. And then the back 2/3 is looking through the microscope, going down into the nitty-gritty and really talking about how to make that big picture come into shape by what you do.
Yeah, well, now that we're going down the rabbit hole of your book and the idea of the macro versus the micro, now let's go backwards a little bit and let's talk about what it is that you work on now, but where you started and what that path looks like. And maybe we can extract from that some ideas to help my audience figure out the difference between a tactic and a strategy, and if they need to reassess the way they're looking at their career or the way that they're looking at their health in relationship to their career.
Wow, that's a big playground to play in, man.
It is. I like broad concepts. I don't mess around.
Well, here's the irony. One of the biggest ironies in my life is that all my life I've been horrible at sports. I mean, I went out for basketball in 7th grade, and I sucked at it. I mean, just flat out sucked. And I didn't hit a single shot that I took that entire year. And so the closest I've ever come to masochism, like literally, like consciously inflicting pain on myself, was saying, well, 7th grade basketball was pretty bad, but 8th grade, I'll have gotten better. Let's do it again. And my grand total of scoring in 8th grade basketball was 2 free throws. I scored 2 points my entire junior high basketball career. And that pretty much sums the way I interact with sports to this very day. I'm horrible at them. So the irony is, I've spent a lot of my career cutting unscripted sports content. It started out with some live things for a show on ESPN called The Great Outdoors Games. It was basically the Olympics for lumberjacks. I mean, like literally log rolling competitions in ponds and stuff like that, and doing all kinds of things up to what I'm doing. What I've been doing recently is working for NBC at American Ninja Warrior, and the string that I'm seeing, like looking back, doing all these sports projects, is they're always bringing me in to bring the human element to these stories of the athletes, whether it's a full-on docu-follow series. I did a docu-follow series for ESPN called Bound for Glory, where former Chicago linebacker Dick Butkus came in and he coached a high school football team and did a series about that. It was a really cool series. But even things like on American Ninja Warrior, the things that I focus on are the athlete background packages. And it's not even so much telling the stories per se as much as creating an emotional space that the audience can identify with. Because if you don't care about the people, you're not going to want to watch, and you won't care how they do on this crazy obstacle course. It's just yet another person, are they going to get up the salmon ladder or not? Just whatever. So it's really the things that people have really valued in my career is the idea of creating feelings. Some of the things that I talk about with my coaching students with the Power Edit is Murch's rule of 6. And I know you've did you talk about the rule of 6 with Murch when you were interviewing him?
I didn't, just because he's talked about it in so many different contexts, and I've taught it in different classes. I'm like, if I've got Walter Murch on the phone for an hour, I want to talk about his regiments. I want to talk about, what does the day look like for him, because that's my focus. But clearly, like anybody that's listening to this, it's like, oh, what is Walter Murch's 6 rules? For the love of God, stop listening to this show and pick up in the blink of an eye. Like, it is the foundation for modern editing.
Yeah, for sure. The number one thing within his rule of 6 is that when you're choosing your next edit point, emotion trumps everything. Emotion comes before story, it comes before rhythm, before eye trace, all this other technical stuff. It's all about make me feel something. And that is really the core of what we are doing as editors. When we're really on our game, we are making our audience feel something for whatever purpose that we want that to be.
And I can tell you that with American Ninja Warrior, you are succeeding without a shadow of a doubt. It's probably no surprise to my audience that I love that show, but it really has very little yes, clearly I geek out on all of the obstacles, and like in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to do this someday. And I'm not even remotely in the kind of shape to be able to do that stuff. But I'm going to give you...
I think you might be a lot closer than you think.
I might be. I know my upper body strength. And well, anyway, I could go down the rabbit hole, the 10 reasons why I think I can't be on American Ninja Warrior. But I'm going to give you the perfect example of how I can tell you that what you're doing is working beyond my own opinion. Just this afternoon, and this had nothing to do with recording the show, we brought up American Ninja Warrior in the car for some reason, and my son, who's 6, just started getting all excited talking about it because he's a huge fan. He's like, Mom, did you know that when they were doing the World Championships that Jeff Britton, he got this fever, and his wife was like crying because he couldn't do it, and he was the first one to climb the ladder in stage 4, and Joe Moravsky had to get in for him. Like, it wasn't this guy climbed the salmon ladder. It was about this guy's story.
Yeah.
And it touched my son. Like, I will put this on the air and say, I've cried watching American Ninja Warrior. Like, there are packages, and for people who might not know, like the package would be like the little piece in between the obstacles where you hear about the guy's family or struggles or why he's doing it. I've cried. Like, yeah, it's such a powerful show. And there are other shows where people do crazy obstacles and stuff. I'm like, I don't care, like, whatever. But there's a reason that Ninja Warrior is popular beyond the obstacles. But I still geek out on all the challenge stuff too. But that's the difference.
Yeah, well, I will tell you, and it is such a privilege to be able to be one of the editors who cuts those pieces. I mean, that's the main stuff on Ninja that I'm focusing on. And the thing that I keep reminding myself is the thing that really anyone, certainly who's hearing this, but also anyone who's wanting to edit, needs to know about the thing under the thing. I talk about the thing under the thing. It's not, the story that you're telling is rarely just about the story itself, because the most powerful stories are driven by core motivations. They're the things under the thing. Like if you have a husband and a wife who are having an argument because, and the wife is saying, why can you not pick up that wet towel that you keep dropping on at the foot of the bed in our bedroom? It's like, and they're arguing about wet towels on the floor. Well, that's what you might think the argument is about, but it's not even remotely close to being about that. It's about the fact that the wife has asked the husband 15 times before and to pick up the stupid wet towel, and he said he will, and he doesn't, and she's feeling disrespected, and she's feeling like he's not giving her, he's not listening and he's not taking action. It's about that relationship. That's the thing under the thing. So when you talk about American Ninja Warrior, yes, those obstacles are crazy. And it's far from the only thing that show is about, because those obstacles become a metaphor for life, because we all come up against obstacles day in and day out. And the question is, when we come up against obstacles in our life, how are we going to react? Are we going to face them? Are we going to just lie down and cry and say, oh, this is too hard? Or are we going to stand up and are we going to fight? And that's why people have such a strong connection. Well, and that's maybe not. There are multiple reasons why that show is so popular, but I really believe that one of the core reasons is that people identify in their own ways with those athletes and their stories and the obstacles that they've overcome in their life, that they are playing out as they overcome these obstacles physically. And that's how the audience really keys in on their own unique emotional wavelength.
Yeah, and there's no question that cause I know that there's only a certain amount of time that you guys have, and I'm sure there's so many stories you want to tell that you can't, but every once in a while you'll have this great background story of somebody, and they may not do very well, but then it'll cut to somebody else that's like 20 or 30 seconds into their obstacle course already, and you're like, well, who's this guy?
And why? And I don't care, because I don't know who this person is.
Yeah, and then maybe they even finish or they do better than the previous one. You're like, okay, so that happened. But if you don't understand the why behind it, that's why you're so invested. And I love the way that you say the thing behind the thing. And frankly, I'm a little creeped out that you have a bug in my house and you know all about the arguments that I think, because for the love of God, I've had that exact conversation, and not just we don't have the towel argument, but it's the same thing. But I'll say, it's not about the towel. It's about the reason behind the towel. That's why she's like, what do you mean? Like, just pick up the dishes. Like, it's not about the dish, but it's great how you're bringing that into editing, because I have that conversation all the time. I've had it with my students when I taught at USC. I've had it with my assistant. I've had it with other editors. I've had it with producers. It's like, what is the scene about? And I'll use Empire as an example. It's like, well, the scene is about Cookie's really angry because this person was supposed to say this and they're supposed to say that. It's like, that's what it says in the script. It's like, but that's not what the scene is about at all. Like, it's about Cookie feels threatened as a mother. Like, that's what the scene needs to be about. And every single edit that you make in your scene has to enforce that. Like, so if you're, and one of the things that you said, I skimmed through some of your book, but like I said, I'm not going to go on the show saying that I've read it cover to cover, but it was the idea that you're looking what somebody is saying, or you're looking at their conversation, and it's about, like you said, getting the thing behind the thing and understanding what is the larger reason for it, and not thinking, well, I just did it because it was instinct. I just felt it. It's like, great, that's going to give you one good cut or one good show or one good movie. You can't replicate instinct if you don't know what the instinct was or how to hone it and make it better. And that's what the thing behind the thing is that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and that thing that you just referenced about, like, oh, well, you can do stuff on instinct. I get so worked up when people talk about, it's like, oh, well, people who are excellent at editing, well, they just have the talent. You're either good at it or not. And I'm just like, that is such a load of crap. Because as much, there is a certain, I believe, amount of talent that people can have, some natural aptitude. The thing is, if you've ever read, are you familiar with Jeff Colvin's book called Talent is Overrated?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it though.
It's a fascinating look into some of the. It's very similar to Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. Just the idea of why are people who achieve crazy high levels of success? How did they get there? And they may have started with some level of innate talent, but that is only such a small part. And when it comes to editing, there is such a lot of content and ideas that people just kind of pass along, and you pick up by feel as you go through years of your career. You may not even be able to verbalize it, but the challenge with that is like you realize, well, I did this I did this cut here, that this is freaking genius. I love this. And you're like, how the heck did I do that? And how can I do it again? It's like, so if you don't have an overall framework saying this is how this stuff works and this is why I'm doing it, it's fiendishly difficult to replicate instinct.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I swear to God, like based on your background and your biography, and now hearing this, it's almost like we have some crazy blood relation. But anyway, when you said, well, it just makes my blood boil when they say that thing about instinct, it drives me nuts. And the response that I've had in my head for years, because I've gone to all these different panels, and I was always, when I was younger, I was the one that was the first in line afterwards and talking to the person and handing them my business card. Like I was the sycophant. That was me. But whenever I heard somebody say, well, I can't really explain it, it was just instinct, my response was, bullshit. You just don't know how to talk about it, and you don't know why it was instinct. And
you're not comfortable enough to say, I don't know how to explain what I did.
Exactly. So what I always said is, number one, I feel like that's a cop-out, and I feel like there's a couple of reasons behind that. One may be you actually can explain it, but you don't want to give it away because you feel that's what's setting you apart, and you don't want to.
Oh, that's my secret sauce.
You don't want to talk about this magical idea that, actually, I could very easily tell you where my instinct comes from, but then you're not going to put me on this pedestal on this panel and think that I'm this amazing editor because I had this magical instinct. And I said, no, I'm pulling the cover off of all of that. And once I myself learn how to hone my quote unquote instinct, I want to give everybody the step-by-step process to go there as well, because there's no real difference in my level of talent to anybody else's. The difference, I think, is my ability to perceive why I'm good at something, extract from it, and learn why it's working so I can make it better, which is being able to break it down into the parts and then teach them. But it's also because I have a fiendish work ethic. But it's not because I'm more talented than other people. It's just the combination of those two things. But now that I'm kind of really starting to be able to say, this is why I'm doing this and this is how to do that, it's like, I want to tell everybody this. Why wouldn't I want them to know? And I just feel like the older guard, the whole instinct argument, it's because they don't want people to realize it's not really instinct. They just don't want to tell you what it is, because then you're going to be like, oh, that's it? Well, I could do that.
Yeah. It can get so muddy because there is, like, I will say for, like, in my case, my background in editing really started out as being a musician. I played piano since I was 4 years old. And people gave me my first Casio keyboard when I was in 7th grade, and a little $49.99 electric keyboard that I plugged into my brother's boombox and bounced tracks back and forth, and that was my first very basic multi-track recording kind of a thing. But really, and I went from there, and I ended up studying music composition in college, and literally just the other day, and I ended up throwing a tidbit to the folks in the audience who know what musical time signatures are. It's like you have 8 bars of 6/8, and you're like, okay, I want that. I want this entire section to be shorter, but I like how this musical phrase is going. You can take 8 bars of 6/8 and you can cut it down to 5/8, and it totally works. And all of a sudden, you have this piece of music that fits hand in glove, as if it was composed specifically for this piece. And that's just one of a gazillion things that, it takes some learning to get to that point, but it is absolutely learnable.
Yeah, and I also think that it can be pointed out that if you look at, let's say, professional basketball players, because you brought up middle school basketball, There's no question that Michael Jordan had a superhuman level of talent. Kobe Bryant, superhuman level of talent. You pull those guys out, LeBron James, like you get the top, like the top 10 all time. There's just something about them that nobody can replicate. You take the rest of the 98.5% of the NBA, it's just people that worked really, really hard, had some level of talent. They clearly had the genetic disposition to being tall and having the body type. But outside of that, there aren't a lot of things that are going to separate them that are just these total intangibles. It then really just becomes about which one spent more time honing in on their specific craft, getting better at it, and just putting themselves in a position where they refused to I don't want to say they refused to fail. They refused to let failure be an obstacle to their success.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's any reason you can't apply that to our field of editing as well, where it's so easy to make it a cop-out and say, oh, well, these guys just have more talent or I just don't have it. It's like you just got to be willing to put in the work. But nowadays, like you said, to kind of come back full circle, people are just focusing on the wrong things. And this is something I see day in and day out on the forums, on Facebook, from emails that I get from people that send me emails about, how I got into the business and what they should be learning. And it's all about the software and the tactics. And, I started to do this Premiere tutorial, but then I saw this article about DaVinci Resolve, and now they have an NLE. And like, I just don't know what I should be learning. And I emailed them back. I'm like, stop everything you're doing and learn how to tell a story. If you can do that, the technology is irrelevant. If somebody were to look at my resume and say, wow, you must know so much cool technology stuff, it's like, no, like I'm still on Avid version 7. Like I'm still working on towers. Like technology wise, most everybody that I work with, especially assistants, they're teaching me stuff every day. I'm like, I didn't know I could do that. Well, that's pretty cool. But
nice.
But when it comes to being in a room with a producer or a director, never once do they say, well, why did you make that choice? Or how can we improve that? And I said, I don't know. I guess I just did it. Like I can defend every single choice. There's a reason for it. I've thought about it. I know why it's there. And that's the reason that I'm able to grow my career the way that I am, is because of the trust that I built. And I think that from what I've read on your website and some in your book, it's exactly the same for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I will say there are a lot of people who talk about the unscripted world and they just think it's the most horrendous, horrible thing ever because, candidly, there is a lot of horrible, horrendous, unscripted content that gets put out there. The fact of the matter is, I actively avoid cutting that stuff. I mean, people talk about Bravo experience. They're just the idea of this network says you have to have cut on this show. You have to have cut a show for us in the past in order to be deemed worthy of doing another one. And the fact of the matter is, I have yet to meet a single editor who has cut on a Bravo show and has thoroughly enjoyed the experience. And it's just like it goes back to me staring at those huge paychecks, remembering about the red streaks running up my leg. I'm like, is this worth it? Hell no. I do not have Bravo experience. I do not want Bravo experience. I want to work. I don't want to work through a notes process where I will get yanked around 10 ways from Sunday just for no arbitrary reason, just for arbitrary reasons. It's just I'm looking to work with people with whom I have a creative understanding, and we can work together to tell stories that mean something and add something to the world, and that people can really identify with and say, wow, this is, he overcome this challenge in his life. I can do that too.
Yeah, I actually remember you writing a post about this concept. I don't remember when exactly. I can put a link to it in the show notes, but it didn't have something to do with you walked past like a poster or something of some horrible reality show. Can you remind me what that was about? Because I remember it was a really good article about this concept.
Oh,
well, and I just got this image of this poster in your blog.
Yeah. It was actually there was a gig that I was on where the edit bay that I was working in had previously had some things stored in it, and so they had moved that stuff out of the storage room that had most recently become my edit bay, and that stuff was sitting out in the hallway directly outside my door. And up there was this poster of, I forget the name of it, of the show, which is probably a good thing, but it showed a couple women wrestling on the ground, dressed up in wedding attire, pulling each other's hair, and part of it was blurred out. So I think there was some partial nudity, but it was just one of these things where I'm just like, oh, not a show I want to cut on, because it's all about, if that representative frame of this show is saying, hey, this is a show about conflict, then that's the kind of show that you're going to have to trump up every imaginable instance of conflict and make it 10 times worse than it actually was. And that's when stuff starts feeling fake. And then people say, we don't like this, it feels fake. And you're like, you think? Because it is, It's just that whole ball of wax. I'm just like, I've been there, I don't want to do it. I avoid it. And that comes back to personal choice. I have been offered those kind of jobs, and I graciously decline on purpose.
And that's a concept that I talk about at length in an episode that I did with Norman Holland a while back. I think it was episode 56. I'll put a link in the show notes, but it was all about kind of defining your career roadmap. But that's a huge thing that people need to realize, is that you can't just always take the job because it's the next job and it's the next paycheck. I went through years of being unemployed because I had a specific trajectory that I wanted to go down. And the question was, is this going to take me down the eventual path? And yes, that path is a bunch of squiggly lines. I actually just posted a show last week about kind of, going after your goals and how the path to success does not look the way that you think it would be, a straight line upwards. You really have to still have some sense of where's the ladder going and am I climbing the right ladder? And when you see something like that, it's like, well, it's a job, but it's not like you're getting paid so much money that job is going to lead to financial independence. It's just another job, and it can end up leading you down the wrong path. So it all, again, factors way back into the conversation we started about in the beginning about health, about quality of life, and saying, well, even if it is great for my resume, even if, let's say, I walk away winning an Emmy, is the quality of life from the time I wake up in the morning until the time I go to bed at night, or if I don't go to bed at night at all and I have red spiders crawling up my leg, like, does this make sense for me and for my life? And those are questions that I just don't feel people are asking enough.
Yeah, for sure.
So what I'd like to do now, since we're on a show that talks about fitness and health and post,
okay,
I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about some of the really cool stuff that you've done in your bay and in your office that relate to habits that build better health. Because you have some really, really cool stuff that's easy that helps people realize, oh, well, I don't really have an excuse. I could do that.
Well, and I will say this all started with me drinking 3 cans of Coke in a day and getting to the point where I'm like, I feel like garbage. It was back in my assistant days, and I was just like, I literally didn't know any better. It tasted good. The stuff was in the fridge, and okay, I'll drink it. But man, I just felt like garbage, and I was gaining weight. And that started me on a path where I went to the gym. I started going to the gym, and I had no clue what I was doing. But at least you start. I stopped doing that after a while. But one of the turning points for me actually was getting married to a woman who, when we were dating, my wife Chantel was saying at one point, it's like, yeah, I just went to this raw milk conference in Cleveland. And I'm like, what? You went to a what? And it turns out this is a thing. And she's always been very much into health and learning about diet and how that affects health. And she was actually the one who convinced me to stop drinking diet soda eventually, just because I was like, fine. It's like there are some lab rats who died because they got pumped with 82 times the chemicals that you get in a human. Of course they're going to die. What do you think? But then the thing that really, this was a longstanding thing for me in terms of drinking diet soda in particular. I thought that because it didn't have calories, it wasn't a big deal. But one of the articles that I ended up being shown by Chantel, she showed me this, and I'm like, when you have all these empty calories, it actually still revs up your appetite and you're hungrier. Therefore, you eat more. And I'm like, So I'm gaining weight and I'm feeling hungry, so I'm eating more. So if I stop drinking diet soda, I wonder what would happen. I started eating less. So just that right there, that was a significant turning point in my health and my diet. It went on from there to there's a fantastic book that really changed the way I think about diet and calories and all that thing. Are you familiar with Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes?
Oh yeah, I haven't read it myself, but I'm very familiar with his work and have certainly read other works that were inspired by that. So yes, I'm very familiar with this concept.
Taubes wrote a huge scientific tome called Good Calories, Bad Calories, which was directed at scientists. And everyone who read it said, this is incredible. The general public will never get through this. You need to write something more relatable. And so what he ended up writing was a book called Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. And his whole thesis is weight gain is not tied to calories. Weight gain is tied to hormones. When you talk about sugar, insulin, that's one of the primary hormones. And it just goes down that whole rabbit hole, which I know you've discussed at length with many different people.
Not only that, but the most vitriolic responses I ever get on social media are when I mention calories. Like just last week, I got into several battles on Twitter just because I posted a link to my podcast called Why Calorie Counting Doesn't Work. It's just like, rah! Like, oh my God, this is such a conversation. Like every time I just post the word calorie at all, I'm like, oh my God, people are gonna yell at me. But I stand by it. It's not because I'm not 100% confident in my stance. It's just because, like, come on, can we just all agree this is bullshit and move on with our lives? Like, enough already. The science is so definitive. Like, just stop worrying about the fact that, oh, well, my soda has 0 calories, so it's good for me. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's not good for you at all. It's very, 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 very clear that diet soda is just as bad or even worse for you than regular soda. So get over it. Like I've had this conversation with very prominent people in the industry that have come up to me after I've spoken at events and said, well, but I heard all those things you said, but listen, I'm good though, because I'm drinking diet soda. And I just want to smack my head against a wall. Like, oh God. But it's the marketing is just so firmly in place and done so well that without the internet, we would still be eating the way that we did in the 80s and the 90s, probably even worse, because we would just be going further down that path. But thanks to the internet and people sharing their information more freely, the truth is coming out, but man, is it hard to break down these barriers.
Absolutely. You know, there was there's a striking picture in Taubes's book, Why We Get Fat, just the idea of there's a picture of a woman who, from the waist up, looks completely normal, like just a normal, trim, healthy female. And then from the waist down, morbidly obese. Morbidly. I mean, like her hips are 2.5 times the width of her shoulders. And so the question is, if it's all about overeating or undereating or how many calories you're eating, it's like, well, which half of this woman overate and which one underate? And which half of this woman did more or less exercise? It's like, it becomes ludicrous to even ask those questions when you think about this condition, because it's like, it's asking the completely wrong question. So that's what put Taubes down his rabbit hole. It's like, okay, well, what's it really about?
Yes, and the if you're going to really boil it down to one sentence, and this was actually boiled down in a Twitter post that I saw months and months ago that ended up becoming viral in the health community, and this. For years, I've been reading about calories and science and like, well, it's so hard to have this explanation with somebody without saying, well, calories don't matter. Here, read this 340-page book. And they're like, I'm not going to read a book. Just tell me why they don't matter. It's like, well, it's not that simple. But then I saw this one tweet. I'm like, that's it. The problem, and I'll let this rest because I've talked about this on other shows, and I want to continue on to all the cool things you're doing now. But I like the fact that we talked about where you started, because there are a lot of people that are at this point now. But it said that counting, the problem with counting calories is that it's under the assumption that calories and your health are thermodynamic. Your body is biochemical. So everybody's thinking, well, I bring in a certain amount of energy and I burn off a certain amount of energy, but nobody's thinking about the biochemical process that happens in your body and how your hormones are affected. So, like, for example, my father-in-law had a conversation with me a year or two ago when I was starting all this. He's like, yeah, like, I never eat eggs because eggs have cholesterol. And like, when you see the egg kind of get stuck on the side of the frying pan, that's what it's doing to your arteries. I'm like, no, it's not. That's not how the body metabolizes an egg.
No.
But then you think, oh, well, why would sugar make you fat? Well, there's a whole biochemical process that's been proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that, eating a stick of butter with eggs versus having a spoonful of sugar, one is going to make you fat and one isn't. But it's the opposite of what most people have been taught. So that I won't go down that rabbit hole anymore because this is going to be a 4-hour show and I'm going to lose all of my listeners if we do that.
Dude, I think we should start taking shots every time either of us says rabbit hole.
Right? Because it never ends. But now that we've talked about kind of where you started in this realization that, having the Diet Coke permanently attached to my keyboard probably isn't good for me, let's talk about what happened from there and some of the really cool things you're doing now that I hope a lot of other people start to adopt.
Well, the cool things that happened from there were the continuation of the changing of the diet. The biggest thing my wife and I ever did was we stopped eating bread and we instantly dropped weight. Beyond that, I actually got more interested in the idea of activity in the Bay, partially through seeing your posts and just being around your collective online aura, frankly. So consider me a testimonial for Fitness in Post.
And by the way, the fact nobody's ever called what I'm doing having a collective online aura. So I might trademark that. That's pretty cool. But anyway, carry on.
There you go. I started doing this thing that was it was started by one of the producers at American Ninja Warrior last April, and it is a thing called Push-Up Club. And what the way it works is different people would join this push-up club and they would write their names on his whiteboard in his office. And every day they would come into his office, drop on the floor, and do whatever number of push-ups they felt comfortable starting with on day one. So, I mean, it can be 3 push-ups if you want, or it can be 20 or whatever. And then each consecutive day, you just do one more. And so I started doing this, and I just kept going back day after day because I decided in my mind, it's like, if this is something that I'm going to start, I am the kind of person that sticks with this. And so there's an internal choice on my part, but it was also an external accountability kind of a thing that was really cool because you get to see the other names of people who are on that whiteboard and how they're doing. And officially, it's not about competing with other people, but it's more about competing with yourself and just doing one more each consecutive day. And I'm like, so what happens when you max out? And the producer looked at me and he kind of smirks and he's like, dude, come on, you never max out. I'm like, really? Okay. And the thing was, there got to a point I was in such horrible shape. Good grief. I mean, I think it was around 35 push-ups. I literally strained my right pec, and I'm like, I'm going to do wall sits today, guys. And I'm like, oh, I feel a little pain. And like, they were merciless. And like, what's wrong? You just not want to do push-ups? I'm like, shut up. I'm still here. I'm still doing this. I'll be back. And so you just make the choice to stick with it. And that crazy little one extra push-up every day, I have about a year later, I've gotten to the point where I would never have imagined. I mean, I'm like the me who strained my pec at 35 push-ups. I mean, come on. Like I'm now like my current record is 88.
And that's without stopping at all, or that's just in the day?
Without stopping.
Wow, that's higher than my max. I'm impressed. That's not easy.
And you don't know. It's like, is that good or is that not good? It's like, well, it's getting better for me. So we'll just keep going with it,
I love that. Well, that's definitely something that I'm going to be integrating into my online Optimize Yourself program, because I love the idea of, like, one of the lessons that I teach is I say you just, like, it's funny you brought up push-ups, because one of mine is you do these things, you start creating these rules in your life. You just pick out these rules. One of my rules is when I'm waiting for the water to warm up in the shower, I just drop down and start doing push-ups. And you give yourself a number that's so brain dead easy that you can't psych yourself out and say, well, I said I was going to do 30 push-ups in front of the shower, but I don't feel very good. If you say, I'm going to do one push-up while my shower is warming up, you have no excuse. Mm-hmm. The problem is everybody gets in their head, well, I'm going to do this 5-day-a-week program where I'm doing couch to 5K and I'm going to run and I'm going to do all this calisthenic work and I'm going to go to the gym, but then they don't do anything. Mm-hmm. The key is not to do it right. The key is to do one thing and get started. You need to take that first step. You need to just move forwards, take one small habit and start it from day one. And then from there, be patient. And over the long haul, everything starts to click into place. But if you think you're going to do it all at once, you're going to fail miserably.
One of the ways that I've found most effective in terms of habit changes is to not try to add a whole bunch of stuff at once. Just add one element, add just one more element so you're not overwhelming yourself. Something like people talk about, well, I want to drink more water. And like taking your idea of having rules. So it's like one of my rules when it comes to drinking water is like I always keep a water cup in my bay. And the first thing I do when I walk into my bay in the morning and I'm opening up my project and duplicating my sequence and blah, blah, blah. As soon as that's done, I take my water cup and I walk down to the water cooler and I drink 2 cups of water. And then I come back and then I go about my day. Every time that I take a break, which on average happens every hour because I actually have a timer running in front on my console right in front of me. It's a kitchen timer. If I still have water in my cup before I stand up and leave the bay, I finish that cup of water. And then I go and get a refill and then I just keep going. And before you know it, by the end of the day, you've had 7, 8, 9, 10 cups of water, like up to 100 ounces of water or whatever. It's really easy and you don't have to think about it. And just like the idea of do things that are working with your own rules that you set up, as you've been talking about, and don't try to overload things by adding too much stuff at once.
Yeah, you got to do it one at a time. And I think to go even further with your water experiment, talk a little bit about how Post-its factor into that.
The idea of actually measuring, like it's not just, oh, I just do this and it kind of happens. I actually have a stack of Post-its that are growing in my bay. I literally make a hash mark every time I drink a cup of water. So it's that kind of a thing where you can see in front of you that this thing is happening and you can see how you've been doing. It's like, I've like the last few days, I've only had 5 cups of water. It's like, you know what, let's do more than that. And so there's a guy by the name of Peter Drucker who was a living, well, he's no longer alive, but whatever, huge author and thought leader in the business management world. And one of his big things that he said was, what gets measured gets managed. And I know that's very much in, that's your philosophy, like through and through. If you put attention on measuring things, like you just make those hash marks on a Post-it note that sits on your console in front of you, all of a sudden, it stays in your consciousness and you drink more water if that's what you want to see happen. Or you do 15 or 20 burpees every time you take a break or whatever you're wanting to do. Measure it and keep track of it.
Absolutely. Anybody that is currently in my online course will say, oh, for the love of God, would you stop saying what you measure you can improve upon? Because I say it over and over and over. And I say, don't try and measure everything at once, but you need to start somewhere because you can't see if you've improved until you know where you've started. You have to create baselines and say, all right, well, here's where my energy is now. Here's where my mobility is now. Here's where my focus is now. Like we talk about creative stamina, creative focus, mental stamina. Like it's people can say, oh yeah, no, I can totally get in the zone. Well, great. Well, can you get in the zone equally at 10 a.m. on a Monday or 8 p.m. on a Friday? If you can't, there's something you can measure and improve upon. How many steps do you get per day? How many cups of water do you drink per day? There's no way to really improve long term until you set a baseline and start measuring. And the cool thing is, and I hear this universally from everybody that I've worked with, they say, oh yeah, I started measuring this one thing and I saw what I was doing. I was like, ooh, now that I've seen it, I want to do more. Like it's such a great motivation to see. And sometimes it's negative motivation because you're like, oh my God, this is all I'm doing right now. Holy, like I've had people that have said, I got less than 1,000 steps today. Like I am embarrassed to be a human being right now. And I'm like, that's great. Use that. Don't feel bad about it. Don't stew in the guilt. Say to yourself, all right, now I have a place to start. And the great thing about your situation is it's not hard to get more than 1,000 steps in a day. It's really easy for you to improve. Like, so now use that as positive motivation, but you have to learn different ways and strategies to measure where you are so you can create progress. So yes, when you brought up the idea of the Post-its and the cups of water, I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to get along just fine.
If I could tie this back to the idea of why that you referenced before, I would encourage people to really consider what you want to see happen in your personal fitness and in your life, in your editing, like the idea of why. I mean, I know you spoke with Jeanette Goodrich in your previous episode on this. The idea of why is such an important idea because, again, with a lot of the sports content that I've cut, I've seen a lot of footage of guys with six-pack abs, and I do not have a six-pack. I do, however, know what it takes to get those six-pack abs, and I am not willing to do what it takes to get those. That is a conscious decision that I've made. It's like, well, it would be, yes, would it be cool for me to have six-pack abs? Absolutely, that'll be cool. I'd love to see pictures of myself like that. But you have to be so dedicated. You have to put so much work and so much attention on that it's like, well, if you don't have a really, really strong reason why to put all that attention and effort into that, it will be incredibly difficult to get there, and you'll just end up frustrated.
Well, and I'm sure that you can also tell me, having seen hundreds and thousands of hours more footage than I have of American Ninja Warrior because I've only watched the show, but if you were to line all of the contestants, line by line by line, back to back to back to back to back to back to back, they all pretty much look the same. Like physically, I mean, some are in, a little bit more cut than others. Some are a little bit more aerodynamic than others. Some have bigger forearms than others. But when you look at the guy that won for the first time, Isaac Caldiero, and I frankly think that even though he got all the money, like Jeff Britton, like seriously, like they should have like found a way to split it or something, because that was such a heartbreaking loss to watch that.
Yeah.
But they weren't there because they have cut abs or they have bigger forearms than anybody else. They were there because they had stronger whys than everybody else. Mm-hmm. In my opinion. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong because you know the show and the characters, I'm sure. You feel like you know all of them. But it's the people that make it to the end that have the strongest whys, 9 times out of 10, I would assume.
Well, that certainly goes into it. And the other thing that is an interesting element to consider when you do look at all these athletes back to back to back, a lot of them are not physical specimens as one would expect. Like, well, you look at a lot of people on Spartan races. Those folks, good grief, you have hard bodies up and down the starting line. It's just like, good grief. The person who doesn't have six-pack abs is the exception.
Yeah, that would be me. I'm standing around all the meatheads thinking, oh my God, what am I doing here right now? What am I doing here? So I know how that feels firsthand many times.
But the thing is, the elements of physical, the elements of physical excellence are not all about having the perfectly toned muscles per se. Does it figure into it? Absolutely, yes. But I can say not as someone who performs at a physically high level, because we've already established that I don't. But I can definitely say that you can accomplish great things with your physical health without being at elite athlete status.
Absolutely. I think that's the biggest hurdle that people have more than anything else as well. I just don't think I'm good enough to be able to do this thing and reach the goal that I want. I don't think I'm going to be able to lose the 50 pounds or do this event, so I'm just not going to start. And if you're thinking to yourself, which of these two things are better? If you had two options in front of you, which is going to make you healthier? Thinking about running a 5K and getting out and running 5 days a week, or just taking a walk? Actually taking the walk, not thinking about exercising 5 days a week, but just going out and taking one 15-minute walk. Which one's better for your health? Do that one. Stop getting your head lost in this idea of, well, I'm probably going to fail and I can't do all of these things and I can't take on all these new habits at once. Just do one thing. Just get started.
Take action.
Absolutely.
That's what it boils down to.
So that being the case, I want to make sure and take action on the fact that I need to be respectful of your time, and you have a family and all these other things as well. But on the idea of taking action, getting started, wrapping it all up under this kind of umbrella of tactics versus strategies. We've talked some about the fitness side, but given your expertise in being an author and talking about editing, if I were somebody listening saying, well, great, now that I understand the difference between tactics and strategies, what's the first thing that I need to do to get started if I want to become a better editor and advance in my career? Where would you send somebody?
In terms of advancing in your editing skills, like the mental angle of it, the number one thing is you need to learn from someone who is good, number one, at doing it themselves, and number two, is good at communicating that well to people, because there are a lot of people who are great at doing, but they're not good at teaching. So that's my number one thing. People who are looking to go to the next levels of creativity in their own editing, that's what I and my people are talking about all the time at the Power Edit. So if they want to come check out thepoweredit.com, we'd love to have you over there. If you love to, we would love to have you at the Power Edit on FB, our Facebook group. And it's a bunch of people who are talking about how do we tell better stories and how do we get there together.
Well, good. You just stole my next question, which is going to be, where would you like me to send people? So there, you answered it both in one. So that's awesome.
There you go.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. It's been a pleasure chatting. And I'm assuming you're in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah. We're
how we have never run into each other in the same circles, I don't know. It must be because I never go out and do anything in the real world. So that must probably have something to do with it.
Well, those of us who are busily building plan Bs,
right,
as we both are, that's there's trade-offs for everything.
Yes, well, as long as the collective aura of my online presence is emanating out into the world, then there's no need. So yeah, that was pretty awesome. I'm not quite sure how to process that, but it was fun. So
yeah,
all right,
you take that, wrap it up with a nice little bow, and you can just.
I absolutely will. Yeah, just wait until you see my website on Monday. After that, the collective online aura of fitness and post.
There you go.
All right. Anyway, that having been said, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I cannot thank you enough for being on the show. And I'm glad we could finally make this happen.
Absolutely, man. Great talking with you.
Thank you for listening to episode 78 of the Fitness and Post podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to access any of the resources discussed, visit our show notes at fitnessandpost.com/78. This episode is sponsored by Cinemody. Cinemody produces high-quality, royalty-free, and post-friendly second-unit stock and visual effects footage for filmmakers. Let's say that you have a restaurant scene, but you just don't have enough activity in the shot. Need some additional extras? Cinemody has the footage for that. Or maybe you need to add some three-dimensional depth to a flat shot. Want to add a defocused tree branch in the foreground? Cinemody has that too. Their flagship second unit post-friendly footage features live-action visual effects content that can easily and affordably add production value and polish to your next project. You can find their second unit collection at cinemody.com. That's CINEMOTI.com. This episode is sponsored by GeekDesk. GeekDesk provides high-quality adjustable height desks. With the simple click of a button, you can change the height of your desk from sitting to standing in seconds, which can help you become more productive, ease and prevent pain, stay healthy, and live longer. I've owned a Geek Desk myself for years and I love it. They're strong, durable, and dare I say, even quite sexy. Geek Desk serves office workers, corporate professionals, creative professionals, and businesses of all sizes. To learn more about the different options that they offer, visit fitnessandpost.com/geekdesk. Elevate your work, improve your health, increase your productivity. Geek Desk. Thank you for listening. Be well.